Welcome to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and we're thrilled to have you joining us this week, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, from data center operators like colocation, hyperscale, edge, modular, and wholesale, as well as data center technology and facilities related companies, construction, real estate, and investment companies in and around data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure, as well as all of the different kinds of outsourced sales and marketing companies that specialize in data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. And the show is for you if you sit anywhere on the go-to-market team. Perhaps you work in sales, like as a account executive, an AE, or an account manager, or business development rep, sales development rep. Maybe you work in product management or product marketing, or just on another part of the marketing team, events marketing, content marketing, field marketing, digital marketing, social media marketing, email marketing, or perhaps you work in some kind of channel partnerships related role, either responsible for recruiting and onboarding new channel partners or managing existing channel partner relationships, or perhaps you're the executive sponsor, the leader, the conductor, the maestro who's responsible for recruiting all of the right people for the right places so they can row the boat at the right speed, play their instrument at the right tempo, at the right time, and at the right volume to make all of this magical alignment and collaboration happen together to fuel, to power your company's growth in this magical, amazing period of time in data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. If this is the first time you're joining us for the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, welcome. If this is your second time back or you're a frequent flyer, we're thrilled to have you with us as well. So what is on the agenda for this week? What are we going to be looking at? First, we'll talk about how co-location data centers can shorten the sales cycle, how a data center operations consultancy, a professional services business, can grow its data analytics business, to grow its data analytics client base. And then we'll turn our attention to how a high performance computing, HPC, solutions and data center infrastructure company generates awareness. After that, we'll take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And in the second half of this week's show, we'll get into how a data center colocation and interconnection company focuses on high density go-to-market strategies, GTM strategies. After that, we'll shift our attention over to a facilities related topic within the facilities part of the data center ecosystem, how a natural gas production and infrastructure company can partner with data center construction firms. So we're spanning not only the facilities part of the data center ecosystem, but we're also getting into the construction real estate investment part of the ecosystem. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's show, Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll look at how a data center power management solutions provider chooses customers and chooses its offerings. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you'd like to see us address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you're watching, and we will add that topic to the consideration queue for an upcoming show. So without any further delay, let's jump right into this week's first question. Oh, and by the way, one more quick question for you before we get started. Let us know in the comments where you're joining us from and what you do in the data center industry. We're always looking to learn more about our audience. So first question up for this week is, how does a colocation data center shorten the sales cycle? How does a colocation data center shorten the sales cycle? That is a terrific question. And I know it's one that a lot of colocation data centers struggle with. Here's why. By the nature of how colocation is sold by data center operators, it's typically sold on multi-year agreements. And a lot of this mindset comes from a very real estate centric approach. Because if you think about data center real estate, DCRE, is kind of considered like the first cousin of industrial real estate, which is the first cousin of DCRE. For all intents and purposes, is industrial real estate, right? So, and it's kind of like considered the first cousin of commercial real estate. So it's not totally out of the ballpark to see people that come into data center real estate from having worked in commercial real estate. And sometimes we see people that sold for co-location operators completely leave the data center industry and actually go into residential real estate. I don't know whether it's a midlife career pivot or kind of a retirement slowing down plan or a more of a deliberate move, but a lot of the skill sets seem to be reasonably transferable when you're primarily focusing on selling space. And that's a whole separate topic of conversation that we could dive into on another podcast episode, is should co-location operators really be focusing on selling space, power, and compute, or bandwidth and density, or should they really be focusing on selling the IT services, the managed IT services? And it really depends a lot on the strategic vision of your leadership, but for sure there is definitely a difference in who you're hiring for your sales team, whether you're just focusing on selling real estate like co-working for servers, or whether you're selling more like you'd be selling managed IT services to a small to medium-sized business. So with both of these scenarios in mind, what should a co-location data center be doing to shorten sales cycles? First, recognize that when a future client of yours is on a multi-year agreement with another co-location operator, it's not impossible to get them to switch, but it definitely is a much more difficult challenge to overcome because they're already financially committed to another company. So the outages, the dropping the ball, the lack of services, whatever, the perceived risk has to get to the point where they're so frustrated, so outraged, so motivated to reset that they're almost certainly going to be taking at least a partial financial loss on the value of that. In some cases, there are co-location operators that, where it makes sense, can do a partial or full buy out of a competitor contract agreement that's already in place. But for the most part, that's definitely something that you're going to want to keep track of. And that's all the more reason why lead generation, lead nurturing, your sales process is not one and done. It's more like it needs to be always on, especially in the world we now live in, where we have the self-propelled buyer's journey, where if we were talking about how to accelerate co-location sales 10 years ago, we would have started by setting the groundwork that most of your prospects and clients would get about halfway through their buying process. And once they're about halfway through, they'd be ready to come in for a tour, sit down and have a conversation with someone from your sales team. 10 years ago, the number that was commonly referred to was 56%. That was from CEB, the Corporate Executive Board. What did that 56% number mean? Is that people typically did self-service research on their own. They got about 56% of the way through their purchase decision, and then you got to meet that prospect or client. However, that 56% number is now very much in the rearview mirror. 10 years of digital transformation, millions of baby boomers retiring, more Gen Z and millennials in decision-making roles, tens of millions of people getting used to working from home at the beginning of the 2020s. And we now live in a world where that 56% number has jumped all the way to 83% and shows no signs of slowing down. That means 83% of research comparing options, evaluating pricing now happens without you in the room. And wow, is that a big change? And that's a really big challenge for traditional co-location marketing and sales playbooks. But it doesn't have to stop you in your tracks. There is a way for you to thrive in this kind of environment. And what it largely comes down to is helping you get out of the vendor box, helping you get beyond just your prospects and clients perceiving that you're trying to just close a lease, button down a transaction, get them over the finish line, and then, run off and take care of the next client. What it largely comes down to is flipping the context on all of that. And instead of your sales team being comprised of like sales development reps, SDRs and BDRs and AEs and account managers, your sales team needs to look a lot more like teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, and trusted advisors. This changes the nature of who you hire. This changes the kind of investments that you and your team members are going to want to make in their own professional development and upskilling and reskilling and workforce development and cross-training. All of that becomes exceptionally important for you to be able to add value more as a peer of your prospects and clients as opposed to the traditional vendor labels. So with that in mind, that's a really important part of the piece of the puzzle when it comes to shortening the sales cycle, because when we go in with that kind of mindset that we're trying to become part of our clients' learning and development, their professional development process, of understanding best practices, how other IT executives, how other companies that are interested in digital infrastructure and co-location have navigated the same kind of challenges that they're facing, the same kind of goals that they're facing, it becomes a lot easier to become client-centric. And that client centricity is incredibly important to earning your way back in a self-driven buyer's journey, where for the most part, your prospects and clients don't need to come to you for answers anymore. There's so many other ways that they can get answers. Even 5 years ago, there was a lot of ways to get answers. But now, in the world we live in, where we have a half a dozen of these amazing large language model driven tools like ChatGPT and Copilot and Perplexity and Claude and Gemini that can instantly give people answers, we have to work so much harder to earn our way back in. Plus all of the stuff that's been around for a decade or more, like asking your peers for advice on LinkedIn, watching YouTube videos, listening to podcasts, attending webinars. A little bit meta here, right? But at the end of the day, to get you out of the vendor box and keep you out of the vendor box, this is a different company culture than you likely have been deploying over the past 5, 10, 20 years if you've been in co-location for a while. And one of the most important ways to shorten the sales cycle, to accelerate the sales process, is to understand that the self journey is really important and recognize that to be competitive, you're going to need to earn your way in early and earn your way in often. Why is early so important? Well, if we think about the 3 stages of a journey that most prospects and clients go through, there's awareness, where they know they have a goal or a problem they're trying to figure out with digital infrastructure. There's consideration, where they're weighing the pros and cons of different kinds of approaches. And there's decision. Decision is likely what your website and your whole playbook is optimized around, the people that are ready to talk to sales. But unfortunately, if you only show up when they're ready to talk to sales, you've missed out on 83% of their research and decision making. And make no mistake, someone is filling that void. Someone is stepping in and training your prospects and clients about what they need to be looking for. What do the best practices look like for an IT executive, an IT decision maker, or channel partner that's in this particular geographic region of roughly this company size and this kind of industry and this kind of job function? And when you share best practices that can help them better do their job as an individual, as a team, as a company, it becomes really, really specific, relevant, and valuable to those kinds of folks. So in order to dial in what we need to do to shorten that sales cycle, we need to get really clear on our ICP, our ideal client profile. So we know historically, where are the most happy clients that we've had? Where are the most long-term clients? Where are the most profitable clients that we have? What do they have in common? Where do they tend to be located? When it comes to co-location, it's still quite common to find extreme geographic proximity preference among IT decision makers, where you will see that they want a co-location facility that's literally within a couple of miles or a couple of kilometers of their office, of their home, or both, for both the decision maker, the decision committee, the people that are going to have to respond faster than fast when there is a legit or perceived urgency that motivates them to want to get into that facility quickly. I mean, server hugging is nothing new. What's a little crazy is that it still persists. But yeah, this is a big, big motivation when you look at how your prospects and clients are making their decisions. So with the ICP nailed down, the ideal client profile nailed down, you can build your target account list. And then within those accounts, we need to know who are the people that are super important for you to build relationships with, based on historically who's been involved pre-sales and post-sales with most of your happiest, most lucrative long-term clients. And for most co-location operators, depending on the company size, the roles will vary quite a bit. For a small company with an IT department of 2, 3, 4 people, you'll get to know just about everyone. At the other extreme, if you're selling to a Fortune 1000 company where there may be hundreds or literally thousands of people in the IT organization, then yeah, your segmentation, what you do with buyer personas needs to get a lot more nuanced with a primary, a secondary buyer persona, sub personas, micro personas. In most cases, too, it's extremely common to find co-location operators that also work with channel partners, whether they're managed service providers, MSPs, VARs, value-added resellers, integrators, master agents, real estate brokers, another kind of indirect sales motion, another kind of channel partner of sorts. So with all of that in mind, the key with shortening the sales cycle is getting in early and often. And when we're able to share best practices, educational resources, and perhaps what's even most impactful for co-location operators are educational events that you hold in your own facility, that you deliver virtually, that you go out and deliver on the road. Getting face time in an educational context is incredibly powerful for transforming their belief system and shaping how they evaluate all of the options that are in front of them. A lot of people that are in leadership roles in co-location make the mistake of assuming that having a booth at an expo is going to solve your problems magically. If you have a perfect match on their demographics and their ideal client profile, it can move the needle a little bit. But at the end of the day, what we really want is we need those prospects and clients to see you and your team members as some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to a company in that particular geographic region, roughly of that size and that kind of industry and that kind of job function. And when you can do your buyer persona research and you come up with their 5 or 10 biggest challenges and their 5 or 10 biggest goals, and you decide once a month, I'm going to systematically tackle each of these in a 10-part or 12-part breakfast seminar or lunch and learn series or webinar series, magical things start to happen because the relevance is off the charts. They get invited to the event and they're like, whoa, how did they know that this is something that we're grappling with? That also makes it a lot more likely that when you suggest that it takes a village to address this problem, it usually is a team effort, and typically people that are tackling this issue come from operations, infrastructure, engineering, cybersecurity, compliance, what have you. So with that in mind, who else should attend? And that's when you start to notice that, wow, this is really cool. Like 3-4 people from the same company registered, 3-4 people from the same company attending. So what that means is in their formative stages of the journey, you're able to really shape the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different approaches for how they're going to select the perfect co-location partner for their kinds of company. Earning your way in early and often. That's how you meet the decision committee, essentially, because you're growing the surface area pre-sales in that particular account. That also proactively makes for a much smoother sales process. It makes for a much smoother onboarding. It makes for a much smoother account management process and does wonders to shorten the sales cycle. Because when you think about a couple dozen, like 25 or 30 touch points that someone's going to go through between the earliest possible inkling that they need co-location and when they make a co-location purchase decision, your goal should be in on as many of those 28 touch points as possible. Some of them could be email newsletters, some of them could be social posts, some of them could be virtual events, some of them can be in-person events. But make no mistake, the more surface area, the more minutes of educational thought leadership content of yours that they're consuming, that brands into their minds that you have some of the smartest people on the planet working on your company, some of the nicest people, some of the most helpful people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything having to do with digital infrastructure and co-location. Truly magical things happen with accelerating the sales cycle, shortening the sales process. So by the time they get to the point of being ready for a sales conversation, the short list has collapsed dramatically. Not only are you on the short list and have stayed on the short list, but many times the short list will collapse down to just 1 or 2 options. In some cases, 1 option where you win by default because they've had such an amazing experience with multiple stakeholders from the decision committee, learning from the smartest people that you have internally about this topic. And once you've exhausted your internal resources, if you need more to plug the gap on what I'm client-centric, then just look to your channel partners and bring them in as guest speakers. But the goal with all of this is if you have a classroom, if you have a conference room, if you have a foyer that can comfortably seat 15, 20 people, I'd love to see you be hosting events almost every week. If you have 3 or 4 buyer personas and you're rotating through week 1, week 2, week 3, so every 4 weeks, there's another part in the series for each of your 2 or 3 most important buyer personas, you will see amazing things happen with the amount of people that are coming from individual accounts to learn from your experts. And of course, a little bit of networking, great educational content, some Q&A, take them on a tour around your facility. But this is what accelerates dramatically the know, like, and trust. This is what dramatically shortens the sales cycle for a co-location data center. So what do we have up next? What do we got? Next question is for professional services firms. How does a data center operations consultancy grow its data analytics business? How does a data center operations consultancy grow its data analytics business? That's a fascinating question, because data center operations can actually span, it's usually on the IT side, but it can sometimes be related to facilities. And then there's a whole category of data center operators that's their core business model. Co-location operators, hyperscale operators, edge operators, modular data center providers, I put into that same category, as do wholesale, but their business models are a little different. Like a modular data center provider is a little bit like a construction manufacturing company, but usually because of the nature of shipping the facilities and integrating and ongoing service, they take on characteristics that are a little more closely aligned with like if you think about like a tiny home, it's like a tiny data center that can easily be transported in and put into place. And given the extreme utility grid power supply shortages that most regions of the world are under right now, modular is becoming incredibly important because of how rapid you can move a small data center into place. But so we have data center operators, we have technology companies, we have facility companies. Usually data center operations tends to refer more on the technology side, but there's definitely aspects of it from time to time that get involved in facilities. And again, a lot of this comes down to how big or small your company is and how you organize these functions. Usually for someone that is running a consultancy, your deepest expertise is in the 24 or so disciplines that comprise the data center technology stack, everything from hardware, software, server, telecommunications, cabling, connectivity, application management, cybersecurity, different than more on the facility side, where facility side, probably the literally hottest areas that everyone's talking about right now are power and cooling, but commissioning, decommissioning, physical security, there's a lot of issues that come into cleaning. A lot of issues that come into play regardless of whether you're looking at technology or looking at the facility side. So as an operations consultancy that wants to grow its data analytics business, that basically is putting you in the SaaS business, is putting you in the software business for your particular clients. So more than likely you're selling some kind of professional services, some kind of consulting services, in addition to selling analytics software that can help them better manage the operations of their data center. So the question is, do you allow your consulting clients to buy their analytics software elsewhere? And do you allow your analytics clients to buy consulting elsewhere? Or are you bundling these two services together? That's not a philosophical question. That's a really important strategic question that your leadership team, your board, your investors should be giving a lot of thought to. Because if you're not careful, if you're working with smaller companies, you could be marginalized over time and struggle with differentiation if you're allowing your ideal clients to cherry pick buying either consulting or analytics software, as opposed to requiring that the ideal clients buy both. So this is also a product market fit kind of question. For a pure play software company, you will for sure have a product manager or a whole product management team. Very common to even at the earliest stages of startups to have a technical co-founder that in the earliest stages wears the hat of being the chief product person, the chief product officer, or something, a similar kinds of title. And with that in mind, figuring out who the ideal clients are for both the operations consulting and the analytics business is incredibly important. And early on, you're running a lot of experiments to try to accelerate the race to product market fit, where you know exactly who your ideal clients are, what services, what software licenses they're purchasing, subscribing from you, at what price points, at what frequencies. And over time, you'll get to know all of your unit economics. So you know things like monthly recurring and annual recurring revenue, MRR and ARR, lifetime value of a client, cost of client acquisition, COCA, COCA, or client acquisition cost, CAC, as it's frequently referred to in the SaaS world. You'll know your average sales cycle length, you'll know your margins. And once you know all of that, the next step in progression is getting to go-to-market fit. That's where as you deploy more capital and you hire and grow your account executives and sales development reps and BDRs and account managers, you know that the wheels aren't going to fall off because you have a process that's working for onboarding and ramping and scaling up new team members, new talent into your company, and your retention is in great shape, or at least you have a strong handle on what the retention is. You've got churn under control. And then the next step, life cycle step for a lot of companies, is channel partner market fit. That's where you decide that in addition to running a direct sales team, direct sales and services team, you want indirect as well. So this is where you might look for managed service providers that specialize in data center technology, integrators, other consultancies that want to resell and provide wraparound training, consulting, customization around your data analytics software. So once you know the answers to those kinds of questions, it becomes a lot easier to figure out who that ideal client is and putting together a profitable marketing and sales and go-to-market playbook for both keeping growing, moving, and potentially accelerating growth. So as long as we're talking about the same client base that buys operations consulting, professional services from you, and also buys your analytics software from your company, then we're looking for clarity on your ideal client profile. Where are your clients located when it comes to operations? A lot of it could be delivered remotely, but almost certainly there's going to be a physical component where you're going on site to clients. But when it comes to data analytics, that could potentially be 100% delivered remotely after the initial installation. So depending on the nature of how you're selling and servicing this, you could potentially be operating in a lot of different geographic areas if you have channel partners that are located in those areas that can supplement where you don't have employees. So all I'm saying is when it comes to your ideal client profile, give a lot of thought to what your addressable market is geographically, like where you can profitably service. And then usually the limitation isn't just where you have physical presence, but when it comes to software, can the technologist, can the NOC staff, whoever's using your analytics software, are they comfortable if your software is only available in, for example, English, or do you need to localize into a handful of different languages to support different geographic markets? So that's the geographic part. The second part of your ideal client profile deals with size. How big or small are these clients? And that can have a pretty significant impact because larger enterprise clients may choose to do things in-house that smaller to mid-size data center operators or enterprises that have their own data centers would choose to outsource. Other things being equal, it's a lot more likely that enterprises will do things in-house that smaller companies may choose to outsource. So getting a handle on the company headcount, number of employees that your ideal clients have, that range is super helpful for scaling your company's growth plans, your go-to-market plans. And for most contexts, if you have both that professional services business going and the software business going, is there will be a floor at which a company needs to be a certain size to be able to afford your minimums. For a lot of companies that would provide like operations consultancy and analytics, your floor could perhaps be as low as like 50 employees, depending on what your entry level price point is. Maybe it's 200 employees or 500 employees. Again, only you can answer that based on your historical activity, but that would be like the low end of the range. And then at the upper end of the range, where is a enterprise so large, like a Fortune 500, Fortune 100, Fortune 50 company, where could it get so large that it just, your company's capabilities just can't meet the complex needs that they would have across all of the different jurisdictions, all the different locales where they operate, all the different legal, integration, compliance requirements that they would have, and you tap out and say, you know, we're ideally suited to work with companies that have, say, 50 employees up to 5,000 employees. Once it gets beyond 5,000 employees, it's too many data centers, too many different countries, too many different complex parts of the org chart, too many different financial, legal, compliance, travel kind of requirements, whatever it is. And so you define that range of the lower end of the range and the upper end of the range. That's incredibly important as you're building out your target account list. It'll be incredibly important for as you're defining your outbound prospecting campaigns, your lead qualification efforts, your drop-down lists on your web forms, your filtering lists, your segmentation lists, and your CRM, your customer relationship management system. In other words, what's qualified versus not qualified, what gets passed to sales, what gets sent back to perhaps nurturing or may not be qualified at all. So there's a size component of that. In some cases too, there may be industry expertise where you're especially good, or there may be industry expertise where they have requirements that you just can't meet today. So knowing geographically where the ideal client is located, how big or small their company is, and what industry they're in is incredibly important for growing a data analytics business. From there, you can build your target account list. And then after that, you should be able to define and prioritize your buyer personas, those within those accounts, the most important people for you to build relationships with that are going to be in on the research and decision-making process when it comes to both operations consulting and data center analytics. For, again, the nature of how granular this is largely depends on how big or small their company is. For a co-location operator with 1, 2, 3 locations that has like 50 employees, everyone knows everyone else. And even the most junior person foot in the door can still get the deal to actually advance. For a much larger, for an enterprise client where there's thousands of people in the IT department and hundreds of people that work in IT operations or infrastructure or something directly related to what you do, yeah, it's a much more complex process and a much more of an enterprisey, much longer sales process, a lot more stakeholders involved, a lot more resources are going to be involved on their side and on your side to figure that out. But at the end of the day, we're really looking to create awareness and educate and build trust with the most important stakeholders to demonstrate, without a doubt, that you have some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to data center operations and data center analytics. What does that look like in practice? For most companies that are providing that kind of pro services and software, doing some fantastic educational events, webinars, live streams, both live and on demand, in-person events at your particular facility, perhaps doing a roadshow, perhaps going around and sending your subject matter experts to speak at industry events. You could do some booths as well or some sponsorships, but where I'd really like to see you over index is on educating and building trust in that particular context. It's super important that you're providing your subject matter experts as speakers, both for your own events and for other people's events. And the better job you can do with aligning who are attending these events with your ideal client profile and your target account list, the faster all of the magic starts to happen, the faster the alignment starts to happen, because the people that are invited to attend and actually do attend see the nature of the education you're providing as hyper relevant for who they are and their biggest goals that they're working on right now individually as a team and as a company, and what they're struggling with most individually as a team and as a company. And the more you understand their biggest goals and challenges in their own words, the easier it is to create a educational events calendar that will really, really resonate. I recognize too that it's very possible that you, to do this right, need 2 or 3 or 4, perhaps even 3 or 4 different buyer personas, or even more than that. How granular you go with your segmentation strategy will depend not only on how big or small your company is and the resources that you can deploy with this, or how big or, and as well as how big or small their company is. As a first effort, if this is completely new to you, just segmenting into a primary buyer persona and a secondary buyer persona is a fantastic first start. Who's your most important, who's your second most important economic stakeholder, which in this particular case could be a IT executive, an infrastructure executive, an operations person, that might be your primary, and a channel partner may be your secondary. And once you really study what's going on that's top of mind right now for data center operations and data center analytics, and you build your whole educational, thought leadership, training, consulting approach around that, you'll be putting yourself in a position where those stakeholders are motivated to want to spend a lot of time with your client-facing team members, not as a vendor, but as seeing your client-facing team members as the go-to experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center operations and data center analytics. So at the end of the day, that's what I really would focus on, is getting clarity around, do your clients need to purchase both the pro services and the software from you, or do you allow them to cherry pick you essentially? It's a much easier playbook and much more profitable, much more lucrative, much more professionally gratifying if you require that you're providing both the services and the software. With that in mind, document that ideal client profile, build out your target account list and within those accounts, who the most important people are that you want to educate and build trust with, what's top of mind for them, and then systematically, once a month, invite each segment to a fantastically relevant educational event, virtually, in person, on demand, all of the above, that really moves the needle on getting multiple people from these target accounts to want to spend a significant amount of time with your client-facing team members as part of their professional development, as part of their learning and development process, as they're upskilling about how others in similar kind of companies and similar kinds of job functions are addressing some of their biggest goals and challenges around data center operations and data center analytics. So that's how I'd approach how a data center operations consultancy can grow its data analytics business. Okay, what do we have up next? How does a high performance computing solutions, HPC solutions, and data center infrastructure company generate awareness? How does a high performance computing solutions and data center infrastructure company generate awareness? That is a great question. And it's highly relevant today because there's more demand for high performance computing than there ever has been because of the acceleration of digital transformation and AI. So for high performance, don't forget you have quantum computing looming on the horizon as well. So almost sounds like by the nature of this question that you're focusing, that you have almost two different businesses going on here, a more general data center infrastructure company and a high performance computing, higher density solutions kind of company, which by the nature of itself could potentially be two different brands, two different companies. I don't know if you thought about that, but it potentially could be two different brands and two different companies, two different businesses, two different kinds of client base. But assuming that you're doing this all under one umbrella, what I would tell you to start with is to consider having a separate go-to-market playbook and sales and marketing resources for each of these two lines of businesses. Because depending on where you're located, high performance computing deals, these are huge sales. Lots and lots of stakeholders involved. In most cases, they're 6, if not 7-figure, 8-figure deals potentially, whereas data center infrastructure could be as inexpensive as self-sign-up co-location for a few $100s or a few £100 or a few €100 a month, or your local currency equivalent. And the nature of the resources that you're going to put into go-to-market and sales and marketing will vary quite dramatically, whether you have a very small number of very high ticket, very high value sales, or whether you have a very high volume of relatively low margin, relatively low ticket sales that almost need to be sold in like a self-sign-up e-commerce kind of fashion. And what we see over time, even among the biggest data center operators, is they're rethinking the nature of whether they're putting traditional sales teams, inside sales teams, or even sales teams that are giving tours and going out and doing field marketing. They're rethinking where it makes sense financially to do that, depending on the average deal size. Obviously, with high performance computing, these are enormous deals. Your most talented, most experienced veteran marketing and sales resources, account executives and account managers will go there. On data center infrastructure, there may be a wide range of company sizes and deal sizes that you're working from SMB, small, medium-sized business, where a lot of data center infrastructure companies, data center operators are moving to self-sign up or purely channel partner kinds of playbooks there, and leaving the more mid-market and enterprise to their traditional direct sales team, their own employees for selling it and servicing those kind of data center infrastructure needs. So with all of that in mind, when it comes to generating awareness, it's a matter of getting hyper specific of where you're best suited to win, where you're best suited to retain, where the clients are most likely to get the most value, where they're most likely to have fantastic net promoter scores, where there's account expansion, where there's cross-selling, upselling, all those kinds of possibilities. And you've really nailed it with producing a differentiated product offering that gives extreme value with initial intended and extended value throughout the full client life cycle. So once you have that in mind, you'll have an ideal client profile. You should have a target account list. When it comes to high performance computing solutions, it's probably a much smaller target account list than you'll have with the much broader part of your business, the data center infrastructure business, that you can sell to a lot of different size businesses. You'll have an idea about geographically what matters, where you tend to win most often. Do you need to have physical proximity to be able to sell, or can these be sold long distance virtually with some travel on the low end, on the more entry level infrastructure side? Hopefully you'll be able to sell a little bit less lower touch. Otherwise, you may run into some significant unit economics problems that will make your CFO very nervous. At the other extreme, with high performance computing, you can really afford to invest a lot of resources in educating and building trust and growing awareness. So with all of that in mind, at the end of the day, like, know who these stakeholders, know the company size, know where they're located, know if there's certain industries where you tend to win more than others, and that'll help you build out your target account list. And then once you've figured out what's going on at the company level, the account level, who are the stakeholders that matter most in these particular accounts. In a really, really large account, an enterprise kind of account, you may start to see IT executives, IT professionals that literally have like HPC and high performance computing in their job titles. It can be that specialized in a very large IT organization with hundreds or thousands of people that work on IT related challenges. In a small company where people wear a lot of different hats, probably not as likely. But then again, are you really going to see that many small companies that are candidates for high performance computing under most circumstances? Perhaps if it's a STEM startup or a research lab or something like that, where there's extreme funding and extreme value for driving high performance computing, but other things being equal, the high performance computing prospects and clients are more than likely from enterprises, because it takes a lot to get a HPC, high performance computing initiative launched and maintained and scaled over a period of time over multiple data centers in multiple geographic regions. So with all of that in mind, you should be able to identify the primary and the secondary, perhaps even a tertiary stakeholder for each of these two different lines of business. And once you have identified the first and second most important, and perhaps third most important economic stakeholder that shows up on that decision committee, then we need to study what's going on in their world so we can become more prospect and client centric. How do we study? We can do interviews face to face. We can do video interviews. We can do surveys. We can study their search and social footprints. Essentially, we need to get consensus on the 5 or 10 biggest goals that they're working on individually as a team and as a company when it comes to high performance computing or data center infrastructure. And what are their biggest struggles? What are their biggest challenges that are frustrating the heck out of them? That same kind of stakeholder when it comes to high performance computing and when it comes to data center infrastructure. Once you know the consensus on that, it becomes much, much easier to create, develop, promote, and distribute educational resources and educational events that really move the needle on generating awareness with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context. So you're able to truly differentiate your company throughout the full journey. And what that in almost all cases mean in a self-driven journey is using educational events and educational resources to get in early and to get in often. And the better job you can do with controlling the surface area on these major accounts with multiple decision makers, the better job you're going to do with planting the seeds so that the most important people on those decision committees see your experts as the go-to resources when it comes to anything and everything having to do with high performance computing and data center infrastructure. And it's not just early and understanding the leading indicator of a high performance computing or a data center infrastructure decision when you do your journey mapping and when you do your persona research. It's often as well. This isn't one and done. The goal should be to have a series, potentially a series of events in person, a series of webinars, both, because your goal to have as much surface area as possible is hitting multiple challenges, multiple goals that you know that that particular stakeholder is struggling with, and that they know is so top of mind for their company and for their team that you start to see multiple stakeholders from the same company attending together. So you're using your educational events and educational resources to proactively drive alignment across multiple team members from the same account in their formative stages where they're open to having their view shaped on how they're ultimately going to approach this initiative. This provides you with a unique opportunity to shape the whole purchase process If you get in early and often, if you're asleep at the wheel and completely missing this, understand there's likely a competitor of yours, a direct or an indirect or a non-business model competitor that is filling that void. So even if you manage to get found in that final 17%, you may be treading water really, really quickly on an extremely price sensitive buyer where you feel like you're talking to a wall. The reason you're talking to a wall is because another company or companies got in there early and often and did an amazing job with building up the know, like, and trust, with educating and building trust with the right people in the right accounts in the right context. So you got out of the vendor box and they see your team members as truly differentiated top experts on the planet when it comes to anything and everything having to do with high performance computing and data center infrastructure. So that's how I would approach in today's modern self-driven buyer's journey, regardless of whether you're talking about SMB, mid-market, or enterprise, for how a high performance computing solutions and data center infrastructure company can generate awareness. We're going to tackle 3 more big questions in the second half of this week's show, Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. But before we do that, if you're getting good value from this week's show so far, make sure that you hit the like button to let others know. And if you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you'd like to see us address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments wherever you're watching. So we'll take a real quick break from a message from our sponsor, and then we'll come back and tackle 3 more big sales and marketing challenges.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.
Hey there, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and you're watching the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. We're thrilled to have you with us for our live Q&A show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we are hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem. If you want to make sure that you stay in the loop about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, make sure that you're subscribed to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox each Sunday. You can sign up on our website directly at dcsmi.com. So what do we have up next? Our next question is, how does a data center colocation and interconnection company focus on high density go-to-market strategies? How does a data center colocation and interconnection company focus on high density go-to-market GTM strategies? That is a terrific question. So as a co-location company, you're a data center operator that is making power, compute, interconnection, potentially storage, potentially amenities like IT services available to your clients. They could be enterprise clients, they could be mid-market clients, they can be small and medium-sized business clients. And in addition to that, you're also providing interconnection, which takes you into the world of telecommunications and meet me rooms and IXs, internet exchanges, carrier neutrality, all of the stuff that makes sure that your data center servers and racks and cabinets, all the equipment that's there, can communicate with whatever they need to throughout the web, regardless of what kind of mesh structure or direct connections are using. So you're in the business not only of being the data center operator, but you're essentially a technology part of that as well in the telecommunications space. So to focus on high density go-to-market strategies, what this usually means is that you're thinking of AI, you're thinking of high density workloads that have a lot more power requirements, that are going to be candidates for either direct to chip or liquid cooling, because the traditional HVAC approaches, traditional cooling, is just not going to be able to keep up. So in most cases, at least in the world we live in right now, what this means is, in order for you to participate in that, your company has to have enough power that you can have these massive racks with a lot more kilowatts than you potentially would have had in the past. And I hesitate to even repeat some of these projections that are coming from NVIDIA and Jensen Huang because it's changing so rapidly. But just suffice it to say that if your co-location facility was built more than 3, 4, 5 years ago, there's a really good chance that your racks, your PDUs, all that need to be rethought for surviving and thriving in a world where increasingly a lot more of your clients want these extremely high density workloads for non-traditional kind of workloads, or at least modern workloads of what's hot right now with AI and GPUs. So with all of that in mind, the good news is when it comes to go-to-market is the companies that are deploying their own servers with their own GPUs, these are really, really big financial investments. And as a result, it tends to knock out a lot of the smaller companies. A lot of the smaller companies are looking at things like GPU as a service, could potentially be candidates to running AI in the public cloud as that becomes more mainstream. But if you're running a co-location facility where your clients are bringing their own servers with very high density GPU intensive workloads, then yeah, they're spending a ton on the hardware. They know they're going to need to spend a ton on the power. And because of that, your unit economics become a lot more favorable, other things being equal, right? These should be much bigger deals than traditional co-location being sold for a few $100s or a few £100 or a few €100 or your local currency equivalent. So what that in mind is, even though you're selling what could be going in a single rack, this might have, as recently as 5 years ago, look like a multi-cabinet or like a entire facility sale, like more like a wholesale kind of size sale in the past. So you're selling to typically a mid-market or an enterprise. Because of that, the unit economics are a lot more favorable. It's a much more complex sales process. You need a more sophisticated account executive, account manager in place, because you're not selling the kind of commoditized co-location that's been around for years. And as a result, a lot of the go-to-market playbook will look a lot more like what you would have typically used for wholesale or hyperscale in the past, where in a particular geographic region, it's not likely that there's hundreds or thousands of prospects. It's more than likely a few dozen if you're selling that kind of workload. So with that in mind, the goal is to penetrate as deep as you possibly can in these accounts by getting to as many of the different members of the decision committees as possible. And your own network can certainly help you understand a little bit about how these org charts map out. Tools like LinkedIn Sales Navigator can certainly help you, but I'm incredibly partial to using educational resources and educational events as a way to attract in the right people where they're motivated to want to spend more time with your client-facing team members. So you really get to know what's going on in those accounts because you're inserting yourself into their learning and development and their professional development process when it comes to anything and everything having to do with high-density co-location and what drives the fiber, what drives the connectivity that drives the interconnection needs with those high-density kinds of workloads. So the 1.0 version of that is building those buyer personas, understanding those 5 or 10 biggest goals and challenges. And one by one saying, okay, I know they're the 10 biggest topics that are top of mind, 5 or 6 big goals, 6 biggest challenges. And once a month, my 10-part series, my 12-part series, where I'm going to try to get the right people from these companies to come into attend one of our educational events or attend one of our educational webinars. If you have a classroom or a conference room that can host that, if not, run space nearby, potentially go on the road to do this in cities where where there's strong pockets of potential interest. And if that's logistically too complicated, there's always webinars, digital events, and always record. Always assume that there's at least 10 times or 100 times more people that should have been there, even in the same accounts that weren't there. So make sure that you have recordings available for people to be able to watch on demand. But the goal is to educate and build trust with the right people in the right accounts, in the right context, so that you're talking about how they can close the gaps on their biggest goals related to high performance colo and related to high performance interconnection, and address some of the biggest stressors, challenges, and frustrations related to high performance co-location and high performance interconnectivity. So once you're able to do that consistently, you should start to notice multiple people from the same accounts attending together, because you put the bug in their head that, hey, when it comes to high performance colo and interconnectivity, interconnections, it takes a village. It's usually a multidisciplinary team effort, and there's people from these 3, 4, 5 different roles. So with that in mind, hit the forward button. We know the teams that learn together grow together, and this is a really, really important part of getting your team on the same page to have a competitive, relevant, modern approach to what you're doing in high density colo and high density interconnection. And you'll know it's working because you start to see multiple people from influence, how they navigate the awareness and the consideration stages of that journey. So by the time they're ready for a sales conversation, you've largely indoctrinated them into understanding the best practices of how your internal and external subject matter experts approach anything and everything that's relevant or a leading indicator to high density co-location on high density interconnection related issues. So that's the playbook. Pretty straightforward, takes a lot of resources, a lot of patience to execute this the right way. And it's just a matter of how you're going to segment this, how you're going to divide up between your primary and your secondary, maybe a tertiary buyer persona. If you have 3 really, really important high value economic decision makers, that's 3 different website pages, 3 different lead generation offers, potentially 3 different lunch and learn series, 3 different webinar series, perhaps 3 different account executives or 3 different pods or sales teams, however you want to divvy up, that gets really, really deeply specialized in that particular segment. We're already seeing in enterprise sales that this is becoming table stakes. And now it's starting to float down even into mid-market and a little bit into SMB. And at the first cut, everyone's very used to the idea that your direct and indirect approach, selling to end clients versus selling to channel partners, is very different. But even within end clients, we're starting to see an appreciation for the value of better segmenting your educational resources, better segmenting your educational events for higher relevance in a hyper competitive world where people just expect ridiculous amounts of immediacy and immediate gratification. They're doing their research and decision making at weird hours relative to what you might consider traditional business hours, and being able to proactively anticipate what they want to know next and always be there is incredibly important for staying competitive. So that's how I would approach how a high density co-location and interconnection company can focus on high density go-to-market strategies, how a data center co-location and interconnection company can focus on high density go-to-market strategies. Ironically, at the risk of, it's not really a pun or a double entendre, but there actually are 2 different ways to even interpret this. There's the IT side of high density, where there's just a massive amount of kilowatts in that rack, and there's a massive amount of fiber that's needed to come in to support that. And there's also the go-to-market part that's high density, where there's deeper levels of subject matter expertise required on your part, more upskilling, more cross-training, a newer kind of hire, a newer kind of account manager than you would have had to have in the past to be competitively positioned to differentiate throughout that full journey, so that your team members are truly seen as teachers and consultants and subject matter experts and trusted advisors, perhaps even thought leaders. So yeah, in the same way that the GPUs are forcing insane amounts of power consumption in a single rack, your go-to-market team is also perhaps much denser than it ever has in the past. Not dense like putting down like Gauche or something like that, but dense in that a lot deeper knowledge and expertise about what makes your clients tick, much deeper customer insight, much deeper client centricity than you have ever had to do in the past. A much more finely nuanced segmentation strategy and personalization strategy that you would have had to approach in the past. So in that sense, yeah, there's an IT and a technology part of the high density. There's also a sales, marketing, account management part, product management part, potentially channel partnership part of the high density go-to market strategy playbook as well. So again, that's how I'd approach how a data center colo and interconnection company can focus on high density go-to-market GTM strategy. So what's up next? Either way, if you're getting good value from this week's data center go-to-market sales and marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button to help spread the word, share the love, and get the word out about this educational resource and educational event that's dedicated to helping your team level up when it comes to all things go-to-market in data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. Next question up is, this one is on, this is in two parts of the data center ecosystem that we don't get to talk about all that often, but are actually super important for what's going on in the world right now. We're going to talk a little bit about energy and construction in particular. So what should we be focusing on? The question is how a natural gas production and infrastructure company partners with data center construction firms. How a natural gas production and infrastructure company partners with data center construction firms. So data center natural gas production infrastructure is the first cousin of like data center energy and data center power. And data center natural gas, liquid natural gas in particular, LNG, is getting a lot more involved because, just quite simply, in a lot of the major data center markets in the US and around the world, there are multi-year waits for getting hooked up to the utility grid. And in many cases, there are community activists that are trying to literally shut down the data center growth because we have so many regions around the world now where data center utility grid consumption is approaching or exceeding 10% of the available grid capacity in a particular state, country, or region around the world. So we're seeing a lot more emphasis now on approaching all of these alternative energy approaches, of which there's like liquid natural gas, hydrogen fuel cells, solar, wind, hydro, and nuclear, among others. So natural gas is part of the energy facilities related part of the ecosystem, both the production and the infrastructure, and data center construction is a core part of the construction real estate investment part of the infrastructure. So in order for the natural gas production infrastructure companies to partner and build deeper relationships with construction firms, it's really about understanding who the construction firms are that are most likely going to be receptive to alternate energy, in particular liquid natural gas and the turbines and everything that would make this a reality. So there's a couple of different ways to approach this. One is first looking at where your company has natural gas pipeline capabilities. I had someone on our podcast a little while back, Lloyd Fussell from Genesis Power, and Jesse Webb from JERA. They partner together, and what they're working on in particular is liquid natural gas pipelines, and in particular, the turbines that get hooked up to generators that provide either a primary or backup power source for data center companies. And the key limiting factor with most of this is identifying where there are sources of liquid natural gas pipelines in these particular markets where their company is looking to sell and operate and manage the turbines and the generators. And in the course of that conversation, we talked about how railroads are often a really good source of the natural gas, and the fiber often lines up with where the railroads are going. That's where it tends to be located. So as a result, you wouldn't think of freight railroads going through downtown areas. Usually these are in more rural areas, but that may be a particularly strong pocket for where data centers could potentially be developed. What that means is you're going to end up potentially with data centers in rural areas as opposed to downtown areas. But that's nothing particularly new, because where land is inexpensive and power is abundant is probably not the exact same place where everyone else is currently building massive hyperscale facilities. So that's definitely going to be a determining factor. So you have that land use in mind, and that's going to bring you into the world of understanding who the investors are that own that land, who the developers are that would potentially develop that land, and it would have the resources to not only address the site planning issues, but all of the zoning and potentially the multi-million-dollar projects that go into from the point that a site is identified to the point that it goes through all of the multiple steps that get to the point where you can have a shovel go into the ground and start constructing a particular data center. And in the recent years, it's gotten way, way, way more complex. There really is not a scenario where people are doing this without institutional investment support anymore, without a very, very sophisticated team that's been through the permitting and the zoning process and figuring all of this out. So with that in mind, what you're primarily looking for is in a particular geographic region, who are the predominant construction firms, who are the predominant general contractors that do business in that area. So in many ways, you're building a go-to-market that's not much different than the same kind of go-to-market playbook that you'd use in other parts of the data center ecosystem. So there's essentially an ideal client profile of where these construction companies are located. There's a company size that comes into play, like what's the minimum size that these construction companies, that these general contractors need to be to participate in these massive projects. It's pretty far-fetched that a construction company with 10, 20, 30, 50 employees is going to be able to navigate the kind of resources to do this the right way. So we're talking about pretty significantly sized companies. And when you have those two factors in mind, where they're located and how big the companies are, then you should be able to build out a target account list of the construction companies that you want to partner with. And then within those companies, figuring out who the most important people are for you to be building relationships with and increasing your surface area awareness and educating, building trust in these accounts. And if they are on the smaller side, then you want to go as high as possible up to the C-level. On the more mid-size and enterprise side, then you're looking for like C-level and VP kind of executives that are probably getting involved, investment officers, development officers, construction officers. There's a host of titles that come about as being hyper relevant to who's going to be spending time talking about how they develop a particular site or particular campus, depending on power availability or lack of power availability, and how they would potentially bridge the gap of developing that property with natural gas as opposed to traditional utility power. So that's the big picture approach with all of this. And then for each of those stakeholders, getting as client-centric as possible, customer-centric as possible, of understanding what they're struggling with the most, what they're trying to achieve, and developing great educational resources and educational events. So you show up not just as a vendor who's trying to sell them on natural gas production and infrastructure, but as someone that really deeply understands what's going on in this particular geographic market for data center development and construction, and serves as a resource for all of this. And in some cases, it's your internal subject matter experts. In some cases, it's other partners of yours where you're curating these educational experiences, these educational events. But that's what you largely need to do, is to figure out where they're located, how big or small their companies are, develop that finite list of a couple, probably in most geographic regions, a couple dozen companies at the most. It could be less than that. In some cases, it could be more than that. But more than likely, there's not going to be hundreds or thousands of data center construction, general contractor kind of companies that have the resources to be able to develop that kind of project. It's usually a few dozen or a few hundred. And manually compile this the same way you develop any other target account list. The good news is, because these construction companies are so huge, you'll see them everywhere. They're almost certainly going to have a presence in some of the bigger association and conference ecosystem events throughout data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways to compile that list. But at the end of the day, in order to get a foot in the door in the right kind of context, so you get out of the vendor box as quickly as possible, it's understanding how your team can add value to how they approach the utility provisioning side, the utility planning, the site planning, site selection part of big data center development projects. So that's the overall playbook that I would use, the go-to-market strategy that I would use to think about how a natural gas production and infrastructure company can partner with data center construction firms. More than likely, there are people on your team that come from that world, or there should be. If they're not currently are, that should definitely be a recruiting need, either on a full-time or advisory kind of basis, and understand that in their world, there also are some people that are used to working with utility companies that potentially could have had some exposure in a previous part of their career to even working with natural gas and alternate energy. Everyone is recognizing the extreme urgency of figuring out these problems. They're recognizing that there's a lot of talent constraints, and a huge part of making this happen is building your team with people that have done this before and that have a sense for where to turn to and to build out these relationships where you're seen as not just the vendor, but potentially seen as the differentiated expert who has this. The real estate folks are playing a big role in this as well. Understand that in the data center ecosystem, construction and real estate and investment are really very tightly joined at the hip. That's why I consider them the fourth segment of the data centers ecosystem. They're not operators, they're not technology companies, they're not facilities related companies, they're not outsourced sales and marketing, but there does tend to be a really close synergistic relationship between construction, industrial, data center, real estate, and the investment firms, the private equity, venture capital kind of firms that make all of this a reality. So it's very possible too, in building these partner relationships, that it's not enough to just be building the partner relationships with the construction firms. I'd also be thinking about data center designers. I'd be thinking about data center site selection experts. I would be thinking about data center investments, data center investment firms, partners at those firms, as well as folks with deep roots in data center real estate. And at some point too, you almost certainly will need to be building relationships with community stakeholders, elected officials, regulators, utility companies, and unless you want pickets and potential blockades, you at some point will likely need to make nice with community activists too and win them over about why your natural gas approach is a better approach than the status quo, all the or the alternatives that you are looking at. So yeah, there's a lot of stakeholders, a lot of personas. It's a complex playbook, but these are huge, huge projects. So think about what's most strategic, pick your battles, prioritize, and go forth and build these partnerships. So from a tactical perspective, I'm very bullish on events, in-person events, virtual events. I'm very bullish on educational resources. I love the idea of having interview-based podcasts, either remote podcasts, in-person podcasts, or both, that allows you to build a strong professional brand, build a company brand, build thought leadership brands, and do research and relationship building at the same time as you dive deeper and deeper into the data center construction ecosystem. So again, that's how a natural gas production infrastructure company can partner with data center construction firms. And that brings us to the final question that we will be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you've been getting good value from this week's show, make sure to help spread the love, spread the word by hitting the like button on whatever platform that you're watching. So what do we got up? What is our final question? So the final topic that we're going to be talking about this week has to do with data center facilities, and in particular, data center power, which is pretty closely joined at the hip with data center energy. And the question is, how does a data center power management solutions provider choose customers and offerings? How does a data center power management solutions provider choose customers and offerings? That is a terrific question. That's one in which I've done a lot of work with a lot of companies in this role over the last few years. So the power management solutions provider, they're not the manufacturer of the products. Like when it comes to power management, you might think of like Legrand and Schneider and Vertiv and Eaton and companies like that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the channel partner ecosystem that works with those companies to sell, install, service, support, customize, all that stuff, integrate with everything else that's in place. And for those kinds of companies, there's a host of different kinds of ways that they position and brand themselves. Some of them position themselves as like manufacturers, reps, or distributors. Some of them position themselves more like integrators or consultancies. Some of them have other lines of business where power is just one part of that. But at the end of the day, I consider all of those channel partners and third parties that are the glue in between the manufacturer and the end user to be a core part of what most would consider a data center power management solutions provider. So to choose customers and offerings, what it usually comes down to is the principals, the founders, the leadership of these companies usually bring a certain core degree of expertise with them when they start up these firms. And over time, as they recruit individuals to join these firms at the executive level, at the management level, at the individual contributor level, when it comes to sales, when it comes to service, when it comes to support, usually you're looking for a certain profile for someone that's had experience in certain aspects of this, of something that's at least tangentially related. So for example, for let's say two or three people get together and they decide to start a data center power management solutions provider, and one has extensive experience selling these kinds of products and solutions into higher education and government. Partner number two has extensive experience selling into healthcare and financial services. So it's very, very likely that at least the 1.0 version of their Who We Help pages on their website and their targeting strategy and their ideal client profile and their target account list is specifically going after those four segments. We say higher ed, government, healthcare, and financial services, where the founders brought that deep expertise. And over time, you might grow beyond that. But in terms of the initial targeting, it usually comes down to where you currently have expertise, where you have relationships, because that's where you can provide the most value to your end customers. That's where you understand their business well enough to be able to get out of the vendor box as quickly as possible and stay out of the vendor box. So you're able to operate more as a trusted advisor, a teacher, a subject matter expert, a consultant, maybe even a thought leader. It depends on how many years, potentially how many decades of experience you have in working with K-12, working with higher ed, working with government, working with healthcare, working with financial services. If you truly have deep consultant level expertise, that can be a game changer for deciding how to choose your customers. And how you choose their offerings is by getting really, really close to those end customers and the stakeholders within those accounts to understand where they're struggling with the most when it comes to data center power within their particular data centers, when it comes to the PDUs, when it comes to the drops, when it comes to the UPSs, when it comes to the generators. The better handle you have of understanding the gap between where they want to be and where they are today, where they're struggling with the most, where their biggest challenges are, and the better job you can articulate that in your own words, and the better job you understand of what their goals are that they're trying to achieve, that are in their job description, that are in their objectives and key results that they're working on as an individual, as a team, as a company, and in these particular roles, the better job you can do with tailoring everything, customizing everything within your go-to-market playbook to be hyper relevant for who they are, what they care about. And that will drive what you decide to offer. That will help shape where you go looking to vendors for you to partner with, where you're essentially becoming an extension of their marketing and sales and services team, because you understand what your target customers are truly looking for and what kind of gaps you would potentially close that they're really struggling with today. So this is basic product management of deciding what your product and services offering should look like, deciding how you're going to build these solutions by understanding what kind of companies you need to be partnering with and how their existing products and product lines fit into that, what's supplementary, consulting, advisory services, integration services, training, support, installation, everything that's necessary to provide a complete solution around data center power management. So again, this is like putting on the hat of being a product manager. This is also what drives your go-to-market playbook for your website copywriting, your lead generation, your lead nurturing, your email marketing, your social media marketing, your event strategy for both in-person events and virtual events. There's a company down in Texas, Tubasing, that does a fantastic job with the Lunch and Learn series for data center power related. That's their primary business, is data center power. There's a lot of people that do a fantastic job with this at the end of the day, with choosing the right customers and choosing the right offering. But the more time you can spend with your ideal clients, really understanding their biggest goals and challenges and how your company and your team members address those, the more likely it is that they're going to let you into their world to understand what's really going on, be way beyond what you can uncover just by looking at their LinkedIn profiles or reading some news releases or some information on that company's website or their company's social media. Of course, do all of that. But if you really want to get deeper knowledge about how to pick the perfect clients and to pick the perfect offerings, it's a matter of getting more time, more face time, more virtual time, more mind share, more know, like, and trust with the right people in the right accounts. And when you do that well, and they're spending a lot of time with you, and there's multiple stakeholders from those companies spending a lot of time with your client-facing team members, it becomes a lot easier to find the correct answers that make sense for your company on choosing the right customers and choosing the right offerings. So that's the approach that I would utilize for how a data center power management solutions provider can choose customers and choose offerings. There's also another interesting thing that came up in an interview I did with a data center director from Eaton. And I think by the time this particular episode goes live in the podcast, that interview will be live as well. But there's a difference in how to approach the selling and servicing and supporting power management solutions, depending on whether you're selling into an established market, like a mature market, or an emerging market. In other words, let's say you're selling power management solutions in the UK or in the US. These are very, very well-established data center markets where it's highly competitive. You're not the first person that's come around to a data center to talk about them with these issues. And you need a much more finely nuanced, much more heavy level of investment to truly compete and differentiate your product and services offering and build a strong professional brand based on trust. It's a very different kind of challenge than when you're going into an emerging market where the level of data center infrastructure, power infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure is nowhere near like the US or the UK or Singapore or something like that. What's an example of an emerging market? Most of Africa, parts of Southeast Asia, some parts of Latin America. But again, very, very different challenges where you're spending just a lot more time on foundational education and really truly understanding what's going on in the market. And obviously there's localization issues that come up as well with not only understanding how to make sure that your marketing and sales approach is culturally and language relevant, but understanding that their drivers and their personas and their segmentation and their account sizes could be vastly different than what you'd encounter in some of the more mature, much more established markets as compared to the emerging markets. So those are some of the things that I'd be thinking about as you're building a go-to-market playbook, as you're thinking about choosing the right customers for how a data center power management solutions provider can choose customers and choose their offerings. If you've been enjoying this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you help spread the word by hitting the like button on whatever platform that you've chosen to watch from this particular episode. If you have an idea for a challenge or a question or a topic that you think we should address in an upcoming episode, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform you're watching from. If you want to stay in the loop, get notified about upcoming educational events and resources like this, make sure that you're subscribed to our Data Center Sales and Marketing email newsletter that comes to your email inbox on Sundays. You can sign up for free. You can subscribe directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. I'm Joshua Feinberg, host of the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show and founder of the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. If you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn and you would like to be, send me a note. Make sure to mention in the note that you watched the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, and I'd be happy to be connected with you on LinkedIn. So we're so glad that you're able to join us for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. We wish you, your team, and your company great success in engaging and participating in this amazing time of growth within all things related to data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. We wish you great success and look forward to seeing you back again next week. Take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.